Alrighty, and we're on. So I'm here with Steven Tripp. G'day, Steve.
How you going, mate?
How you going?
Good, Johnny. How are you?
I'm good. So we didn't actually, I don't think we met on the campaign trail, but Robert Nambani, and you obviously, had some quite thorough interactions with him, and you had obviously a pretty interesting run, in terms of going through the federal election. Perhaps we start there and we sort of debrief, some of your thoughts in terms of, how it all went down and what I guess inspired you to actually put your hand up first of all, and then, how you actually found that whole process.
Well, I guess I'm a lot like all the other One Nation and UAP candidates that I found along the way, really drawn into the federal election due to what was happening with the lockdowns and the mandates and having our livelihoods threatened, or even taken away. In my case, I thought Gladys Berejiklian was doing a good job with the lockdowns and especially when she started doing those isolated lockdowns of specific areas, like the Northern Beaches where I live. That was one of the first areas that she locked down specifically, and it was around Christmas. It was about a 2-week period, and it was another 2 weeks for the north area, the Northern Beaches. But you could understand because it left the rest of Sydney open. Which was fair. And I remember telling people, we're lucky that we live here in New South Wales because you wouldn't want to be living in Victoria or, other places around the world. Like, we're actually pretty lucky that we've got someone that's handling the pandemic quite well. And I remember my wife and I were, we had a baby on the way and we were looking at getting married. Obviously we wanted to get married before the baby was due. So we were actually looking at wedding venues, I think the day that she announced the big massive lockdown, which I think happened in June or July. And that would have been 2021. And that's when she completely changed. And I think her strategy of locking down certain smaller areas didn't quite work. The cases got out of control, and then I guess she had Kerry Chan in her ear every day, blowing up the situation, and they just panicked. And that's when the whole situation changed. And obviously we the lockdowns became more severe, but then the push for the vaccine became more severe.
I think it's interesting, the Northern Beaches thing. I actually remember when that got announced because at the time I was on a boat with these other BMW dealers at the time. And, I think one of them just got the notification or whatever, was telling us all, and it was like, and he was like, "Oh well, there's my Christmas." And it was interesting, and I think why that strategy would have worked for the Northern Beaches is because the Northern Beach is quite insular, right? So
there's a big difference being locked down in the Northern Beaches than being locked down in, say, Parramatta, where I used to live. And the rules here were a lot more relaxed. Like, we'd go for a little bit of a walk down on Manly Beach there, and no one would wear a mask. And the police would be there. I remember down at the Corso, the police would be on horseback just watching people walk past without wearing masks. And I called one of my friends, he lives at Bexley, and I said, how are you guys going there with the lockdown? Do you guys wear masks as well? He's like, yeah, of course we wear masks. And I'm like, do you get hassled? He's like, yeah, the police will be onto us straight away if we don't wear masks. And I'm like, well, there's a different kettle of fish here. But that's just the way it was, I suppose.
And so then, when it all sort of went a bit pear-shaped, what then, it's a pretty big catalyst to then go and say, okay, I'm going to, put my hand up and run an election. Like, I definitely went through the same sort of emotions and feelings. And I guess, for me, when I went through that, I obviously had a very good discussion with my wife about it. And I knew, obviously a lot of my family would have been like, what are you doing? You're crazy. A lot of my, I had a lot of friends who probably thought I was crazy, right? What sort of reactions did you get from the people around you?
Well, my family, for the tipping point for me was the vaccine mandates. And my family, my brother was about to take it, and I caught wind of it and I talked him out of it. And so I'm happy that happened. My mum ended up taking it. My dad didn't want to take it, so he remained unvaccinated as well. So they were pretty much on board with me. My mum was a bit kind of like, you're going to lose your job, you're not going to be able to do this, blah blah blah. There's a little bit of pressure there, but not too much. I was actually lucky. I've heard stories about people losing their friendships and things like that. I didn't cop any of that. My friends were. I tend to have friends that are more open-minded anyway.
Yeah.
And even though they didn't quite, some of them openly didn't agree with me. They weren't forceful about it. They were just basically saying, look, this is the path of least resistance. You know, you're going to have to do it eventually. There's no way out of it. And other friends were like, they were hesitant, and they were like, one friend in particular, he didn't want to take it, but then he got some advice from a pharmacist friend of his, and that convinced him. And he even said to me, look, I'll hook you up with this guy, and you can have a conversation with him to make you feel, you know, a little bit better about it. Yeah. But for me, it wasn't so much the vaccine; it was more being forced into it as well. Yeah. I didn't want to be forced into it. I didn't believe that's what this country stood for, and that was a big part of me being motivated to run for the election. But I'd also started, I guess my dream job on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. I was surveying there, doing night shift, getting paid very well.
Yep.
And we just bought this place here, and I felt we were set. We had a baby on the way. I could get by with my wife not having to work.
Yep.
And we could still cover the mortgage and everything like that. And I started that job in about May. In June or July, when the lockdowns came in, I remember we were still working because we were, I guess, considered essential workers.
Yep.
Whatever that means. And I remember the safety guy coming up to the boys at that time, and they had his little mobile phone. He's like, "Oh, anyone that's been vaccinated, just show me your vaccination status. I'll scan it on." And I'm like, and as soon as I saw that, I'm like, I'm dead.
Yeah,
I'm
gonna lose your job.
I just started this job.
Yeah,
and I can see where this is going.
Yeah,
they're starting off slowly. They're going to say, "Okay, we'll just scan on now," but when they get enough numbers, they're going to mandate it. I just knew that it was going to happen, and it was a terrifying period because I'd go into work every night for the safety meeting beforehand, just thinking to myself, is this the night?
Yeah.
Is this the night where, and every time they brought up COVID, my heart would just be like, I'd just be like freaking out. And it just dragged on for months. It wasn't until probably about late November or so that they actually announced it, because it was a Transport for New South Wales job, and it was Transport for New South Wales that brought in the mandate. And I remember my supervisor and I were the only ones that refused to take it. Yeah. And I was following him to a container to get some gear, and the safety guy walked past, and the safety guy was a nut job. And he's like, "Oh, did you hear you guys are going to have to get vaccinated now. They brought in the mandate." He's laughing about it. And I'm like, "Oh no." You'd been waiting for it to come, and that moment finally came. Yeah. And I'm like, "What do I do now?" And then I got a quiet moment with my supervisor, and he said, "Yeah, you're going to have to start looking for another job." And I got told by everyone, you're not going to find, they're mandating it everywhere, and even if they haven't mandated it, because it was projects specific. Yeah. There's different projects in construction all around Sydney or wherever. But I was getting told either projects have mandated, or the ones that don't have a mandate, they're not accepting anyone that hasn't been vaccinated. So they'll keep the ones that have been working there.
Yeah, but they won't employ anyone new.
They won't employ anyone new. And so there was a period there where I took the rest of my annual leave, exhausted that. Yeah. I kept talking to my boss, are you looking for anything? Are you looking for anything? Like, have you found anything? He's like, I can't find, I've talked to everyone. I've tried to pull every string I can. I can't find anything. And I'd calculated that I had a year, that we were far enough ahead in our loan repayments that I could get by for a year without having any income, and then we would be okay. But it was still a terrifying time. Like, my daughter was 2 months old. I'd wake up every morning and look at her and go, well, what happens in a year? Is this all going to blow over? And I thought it would. I didn't think that this was sustainable in any way. Yeah. But 5 weeks went by. My annual leave got exhausted. Yeah. So then I started doing delivery driving. Yep.
Like Uber Eats and stuff?
Oh, it was DoorDash.
DoorDash, okay.
So I did DoorDash. There was one day I did about 8 hours and made about $200. I'm like, this is ridiculous. Yeah. And I'm like, and you just flat out like the whole time. Running, if this is what I have to do, this is what I have to do. Yeah. And then I started hearing stories about other guys on sites that were unvaccinated and they were still working. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. I've been told that, they're mandating it everywhere. I won't be able to find work. I'm like, I'm just going to reach out to a couple of people that I know and see what's out there. I did that. The next day I had 3 job offers.
Wow.
So what I was being told was a complete lie. I could have worked that whole time. And 5 weeks is not a lot of time, in the whole scheme of things. But it is when you're going through that mental anguish.
Yeah.
And so I reached out to the employers and they were more than happy to have me. So I was lucky that way I could get back to work. The circumstances were definitely not as good as what I had. The money was definitely not as good as what I had.
Yeah.
But at least I had an income coming back in. I could get back into the workforce. But to ask about why I ran for election, I was seeing a lot of people protesting. A lot of people didn't really know what to do. And I'd always loved politics. I was always a keen follower of politics. And I just felt that if we were going to do something, we had to trust in the system that we had. Our system is very good here in Australia. And if we don't trust that system, then what do we have?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, government is only what the people agree with.
Yeah.
If the people don't agree with the system, then you have a revolution.
Yeah.
And I felt that there were forces that were trying to push for that revolution, and I didn't think that was the best way to go. Let's flesh out the system that we have first. And I'm not, I'll go to the protests and stuff, but I just didn't think that they were going to get anywhere. The only way that we were able to do something was to run for election. So, that's why I went down that avenue.
Yeah. It's quite interesting, with Pauline Hanson and now me being an Asian guy, right? Like growing up, my parents obviously weren't very keen on Pauline Hanson's or what she used to espouse, because I guess, part of her politics was to sort of be a little bit divisive about how she approached things. I'm a little bit curious, did you have any dealings directly with Pauline? And I guess, did you manage to, or like, did you speak to anybody around her or in her circle?
Pauline is a little bit up above you. I've only met her twice, and it was very brief both times.
Yeah.
She's kind of like a little bit protected.
Okay.
No one really has any direct contact with her.
Yep.
For whatever reason, I don't know what that reason is.
Yeah.
I was concerned, as you mentioned, the whole Australia's being swamped by Asians comment in her maiden speech. She's never been able to live that down.
No.
And growing up in the inner west of Sydney, a lot of my friends were Asian or Indian or all different backgrounds. I got friends of all different backgrounds. My best friend at high school was Filipino. One of my good friends from all the way back from primary school was Sri Lankan.
Yeah.
These were really good friends of mine. So when I was looking around at, when I first decided to run, it wasn't I'm going to run for One Nation. It was I'm going to run.
Yeah.
I didn't know what party I was going to run for.
Okay.
And I looked around. First I looked at One Nation because I really liked what Pauline Hanson and Malcolm Roberts were doing in the Senate. They were the only ones that were standing up and saying, hey, we're trying to push back against these vaccine mandates. And they were having convoys and blockades in Queensland, and Pauline will go down and support them and things like that. So I thought One Nation is the only party in government that's doing anything. So my first thought was to run for them, but the first thing comes up, well, there's a lot of smear against the party. There's a lot of stigma there. You're up against it straight away. Yeah. Even before anyone knows who you are or what you stand for, they're going to say, well, One Nation, you don't want to go there. So I looked at the Liberal Democrats, and I they had similar policies, but I just didn't feel like they had a platform. Like no one really knew who they were. They had a couple members down in Victoria, but that was about it.
Yeah.
For some reason, I didn't even consider the UAP.
Yeah.
I thought they were done after what had happened with Palmer United.
Yeah.
I just didn't. They didn't even register on my radar, and it wasn't until I had already applied for One Nation that UAP kind of like rose like a phoenix. From
the ashes.
I'd go to these rallies and there'd be UAP signs everywhere, and I'm like, where'd they come from? You know? So I don't know if I would if I'd considered UAP. I don't know. Maybe I would have put my hand up for UAP, because I feel like, dealing with yourself, and as you mentioned, Robert Nalbandian and Andrew Robertson, who was the candidate here in Warringah.
Yep.
I got on very well with all the UAP candidates and volunteers. It's almost as if, like, I have kind of probably more friends from the UAP than I have from One Nation. It's very similar.
Yeah.
But I think I would have fit in like, you know, just as well as I fit in with One Nation being in the UAP. But for whatever reason, I didn't think of those. So I kind of was like, okay, well, One Nation is probably the best idea. And then I went into work and I spoke to my supervisor and I said, hey, I'm going to run for One Nation. He's like, well, I'm going to vote for Ricardo Bossi. I'm like, who's Ricardo Bossi? So he showed me this video of this. It was a War for the World video that he made.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is the guy. Like this guy is the leader that we're looking for, because he was, you know, in a suit and he's very well presented and he seemed to know his stuff. And he was like, I'm a lieutenant colonel. I'm not going to back down. And I'm like, okay, well, and I looked at his policies and I'm like, well, this could be a good option as well.
Yeah.
So I went through that process. I even did the working for children's check and all that sort of stuff. And I just never heard a reply from them.
Mm.
And so I'm like, well, I'd applied for One Nation at the same time as well. And at least they were replying.
Mm.
So I remember I went to one of the rallies and I get there and Ricardo Bossi's up on stage wearing his full camo outfit. I'm like, I feel like I'm in a South American rebellion or coup or something like that. I'm like, okay, I'm glad I didn't go down that path. And then he started with the swearing and all that sort of stuff. It was very disappointing. And I've met people that have known him. I've never met him myself, but they all tell a very similar story about him. He kind of gets a little bit paranoid. He builds up a very good group around himself, and then it all falls apart, which is unfortunate because I think he had potential. But I think in the whole scheme of things, I'm probably happy that I decided to go with One Nation. Did I have any dealings with Pauline? No. In the beginning, we all went through the campaign managers. I had 2 interviews.
Yep.
Initially, I applied for the Senate. And they said, look, you know, you're a good candidate, but basically you have to be well known to run for the Senate.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay. They're like, well, would you run for Warringah? We want you to run for Warringah. I'm like, well, I haven't lived here that long. I've been here maybe about a year or 2. At that stage, it would probably be about a year. And I wasn't paying attention in 2019 when Abbott went against Zali Steggall. I know there was a lot of issues there, but I wasn't paying attention at the time. I was more, you know, into Trump and American politics. You know, how can you not be, right? So but I was like, you know, if that's what you want me to do, that's what you want me to do. So that's how I ended up
running for Warringah. Yeah. And then, okay, so now that you like it's all done and dusted, you've had some time to reflect. What were some of the key takeaways for you? Like, I guess, you know, for me, I looked at it as a really great opportunity. So I was a Senate candidate for the United Australia Party, but I was 5th on the ticket. So I already knew from the outset that I had a very, very, very small chance, like it's practically impossible for me to get elected, right? But that didn't impact my drive simply from the perspective of, you know, part of the reason why I ran was because I was running a car dealership for a group, and there was myself and a few other managers who weren't vaccinated. And my stance was that I was happy to get vaccinated, but I wanted to wait to be able to pick the choice of vaccine that I wanted. So originally I was waiting for Novavax. Yeah. And
I was too.
Yeah. Well, I'd let them know. And but they...
Or Nikolai Petrovsky's vaccine, who, you know, if people don't know, he's an Australian down in South Australia, Flinders University. He developed his own vaccine that's being used in Iran or Iraq. I always get mixed up which one, but he's got very, very safe results, you know, in his trials and everything like that. And we actually had him on our podcast recently. And I would look at him and go, well, yeah, you know, I listen to his podcast and stuff. If I have to take something, then I'd take that. Yeah. But
And so that was sort of the situation at my workplace. And then what sort of really got me upset was that basically, you know, like because I was quite vocal in terms of my own position, they sort of knew where I was at. And they said to me, you know, you've got, you know, these people that in your business that haven't told us what their intentions are, but you need to go and basically have a conversation with them and let them know that, hey, you know, if you don't go and do this, well, this could potentially cost you your job. And so for me, you know, obviously that didn't sit very well with me, because I was like I don't care what people want to do, but you know, it's your choice, and it should always be your choice. But because I was running this business, I said, okay, well, look, I'll have this conversation with them. I'm not happy about it, and I'm going to tell you that I'm not happy about it, but you already know my position on things. So after I had that conversation with my team, because I have a very good relationship with my people, because I used to always explain to them that we're working together, right? Like we're all in this together. So I would say to them, look, this is what the board has asked me to do, and this is the current situation. So I don't know what your personal circumstances are. I can't make. Don't make your choices based on anything that I'm doing. You need to make those decisions based on your own family and your own choices. But that's basically where we kind of sit with it. So in terms of the managers all ended up having to go and get it done. I had a few staff that didn't, and then obviously they're no longer employed there either. And then a few months later, so as we were supposed to be approaching October and coming out of lockdown, I was like, okay, I'm expecting to go back to work, because unfortunately my LGA got impacted in one of those, you can't travel 5Ks from your house and blah 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 blah. And then I get an email to my personal email account requesting a meeting. I'm like, oh yeah, here we go. And then so then the conversation was basically just we didn't even enter that conversation. I just got made redundant. So that was interesting, and to go through that process, like, okay, you don't even get a chance to discuss it any further. And it's quite funny. You can be a general manager or a dealer principal, and you can get made redundant, but then there's still somebody to do your job. Like
that was the line that they crossed for me.
Yeah,
and that's if that can happen in this country, and it shouldn't happen in this country. Yeah, that's the whole principle of what Australia should be and how our government is structured. And that the fact that the lockdowns were bad enough, but the fact that they were forcing people into getting mandated, and then you had Morrison standing up there saying there's no mandates. Yeah. I'm like, well, there are.
Yeah, and look, like the owners, like I'm okay with the owners. Like I sort of understand it from their perspective as well. And one of the brothers actually said to me, he goes, Johnny, why don't you just do it, man? Like, I don't want to do your job. That's basically what he said to me. As I've got my box of things, and it's like, mate, like, it's the fact that you guys have to make a choice like this, it's bullshit.
Yeah.
So
right. And like I there were moments there, like especially that when I found out, there was a day there where I was like, well, maybe I can take the AstraZeneca.
That was no better.
None of them were any good, and I'm glad I didn't take anything. You don't know what you're putting in your body. Because I don't even drink coffee. I'm that much of a health freak, but it's just kind of like.
So to go back one step, so like Astra is no longer, you can't even get it, right?
Yeah.
So we're not saying that to take the piss. We're saying that because you legitimately can't. It's been removed from. You're not allowed to take that one anymore. Yeah. So we're not saying anything that's controversial or whatever.
Yeah. That's
just
right.
in case YouTube doesn't like me, but but yeah, you can't even take that one anymore, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so, and I just didn't think that people should be forced into doing something that they didn't want to do.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people out there that took it.
Yep.
I had one guy come up to me and he just said, look, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
You got to support your family.
Yeah.
You got no other option.
Yeah.
And I just felt that's not what Australia is meant to be. That is not what people fought for this country, for it to happen that way.
Yeah.
And that, I guess that opened up the door to be political.
Yeah. So, coming back to the experience, right? So part of the, interesting or the fun thing I thought was I really enjoyed campaigning, to be honest. I enjoyed doing the speeches. I enjoyed, meeting people and really listening to people and just like, trying to serve as a conduit to inform, what when we talk about policy, okay, what's good policy? What formulates good policy? And part of that I think was a really strong thought exercise in terms of what is good governance, right? I went through all of those sorts of thoughts and spent a lot of time really picking apart policies and trying to understand, okay, let's think about this from, because there's always a very simplistic view of it, like you pull one lever and you're going to get X, right? But there's a much more complicated lever. Like, so as an example, I remember when I would do some campaigning on the streets, and like I actually would go out and with my phone and just on the selfie mode, like I'm a blogger, and I'd go up and talk to people. And I would ask them questions about, what do they think about X, Y, and Z? And then not to, like, when I first tried it, and if you want to lesson in how quickly people judge you, if you go and, if you were to go out and say, I'm from One Nation X, Y, Z, or I'm from the UAP or whatever, it was a totally different conversation when you would do that versus if you just had a conversation with somebody normally and then mention it at the end. So, and that's, I guess, the basis of a lot of prank videos now, right? Like, so people do that in pranks where they'll like, go and try and make out like this is some story, and then they'll go and say, oh, look, I'm just joking at the end of it. Like, and so then you get a real honest reaction out of people.
Yeah.
Whereas if you lead with, oh, I'm from XYZ, it's like, you're like the door-to-door salesman. Yeah. Slam the door shut in your face, not interested. I don't care who you are. I'm not about what you're about. And it was really interesting to experience that.
And I think that's the biggest problem with the minor parties, especially One Nation and UAP. You've got that war up against you straight away, and I couldn't understand why there was so much heat on the UAP. Once I got into the campaign, I could understand One Nation because there's 25 years of baggage there, right? you can draw on specific instances.
Just name a group that Pauline hasn't offended, right? I mean, look, Pauline, we're not.
But the narrative is there, right?
I
mean, it's perception.
Yeah.
And whether it's true or not, that's another debate. But the perception's there.
Yep.
And it's a hard wall to break down. The same issue is with Mark Latham. There's a certain perception there. But if people looked at the policies, well, in my view, I'm like, well, you can't go past the One Nation policies. I know UAP had a very similar set of policies. So it's breaking down that wall. How do you get people to? And look, a lot of people are apathetic about politics. They just read a couple of headlines and that's it. Yeah, they don't really care. They don't feel like politics can work for them. Yeah, but it's interesting that you said you enjoyed campaigning. I guess I'm the opposite. I was having when they called me and said, okay, you're the candidate for Warringah, I was like, okay, that's cool. And then the next breath, I'm like having panic attacks. I'm like, oh no, what am I going to do now? What have I done? Because growing up, I was always had a lot of social anxiety. Even to this day, like my wife is very outgoing and she's like, everyone loves you. I'm like, no. Like I always feel like, if I do something like this, right, I'll feel very comfortable doing it at the time, maybe, or I'll be nervous coming into it. But at the end of it, I'll overanalyze. I'm like, oh, I screwed that part up, and maybe I wasn't as good as I should have been. So I've got that analyzing mind.
Mindset, yeah.
And I overanalyze things, and I get very self-conscious. And I had to kind of turn that off during the campaign. Otherwise, I just wouldn't have been able to do it. Yeah. And I was, I guess part of it is you're so busy that you get caught up in so many things that you don't have time to analyze it. So that worked well for me because I was constantly doing something that if something came up, and I probably shouldn't tell this story, but
but tell it anyway.
I had this guy, and the way that One Nation's structured, we don't have branches. We have what's called these regional coordinated committees.
Yep.
And the head of it's called an RC, a regional chair, and I had got one in this area, and he'd been part of the party for a very long time, and he basically said, we're going to do this, this, and this, blah, 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 blah. It listed all these things that we're going to do. Most of it never happened. And his big idea was to go down to the Brookvale Oval when the Sea Eagles were playing. Yeah. And he was going to have this big marquee set up, and we're going to stand there handing out flyers. I'm like, okay, well, that's my first time ever doing any sort of campaigning. Yep. Being in the public view at all. So I get there, and he's already setting up in a car space. Yep. Like opposite the stadium. Yeah. Or right next to the stadium. I'm like, why is he setting up in a car space? But at that point in time, I was just trusting him. Yeah. So he sets up this bloody marquee. We're putting up signs, setting up tables with the flyers all over and everything like that. And we're standing there for about an hour, and he's got his car double parked at the same time, just down on the street. I don't know. And he went off somewhere to put up a corflute somewhere, and we didn't know where he went. So I'm standing there with another volunteer who's become a very good friend of mine. His name's Sam. We've had him on the podcast as well. And I'm looking at the security guards, and they're just watching us the whole time. Like, what are these guys doing? Like, and then people would come up and they'd be like, "Oh, where am I going to park?" And I'm just like, and there's something not right here. And Sam turned around to me and he said, "Look at all the people streaming in down there. Like, we should be standing there, instead of set up here. Like, no one's coming up to us, no one's around." Yeah. And next minute, the security guard comes up to me and he's like,
Hey, you got to go.
He'd gone from like just standing there looking at us to like making a scene.
Yeah.
And he had his voice raised and he's going, "You guys are set up in the disabled car park."
Oh, wow. Oh,
and we didn't know because there was no markings on the ground or anything like that. But it had been designated for the game day.
Yeah.
And it had, One Nation everywhere, it's, and he's like, you've been double parked for an hour. What are you guys doing? Like, you want people to support you, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh man, like if this gets into the media or anything, I'm stuffed. Like, thankfully we packed up straight away and we got out of there. And like, if I'd known that it had been a disabled park,
yeah,
and if it had been me now, like if I'd rocked up now, I would be like, no, we're not doing this. But because it was my first time campaigning, I'm putting my trust into this person who'd supposedly been with the party a long time. But it was just funny. Like I can laugh about it now, but at the time I was like, this is not good. And this is not the way that I want to start my campaign.
Yeah.
And it's just like little stories like that you come across. And what we should have done is we should have ditched the marquee. We should have ditched all the tables, just had the flyers and just hand it out on the street corner. That's all we needed to do.
Yeah.
Maybe put a call flute up here or there.
Yeah.
But you get these people that have these grandiose schemes and you get kind of sucked into it. And
well, I think the core of it, right, and why I liked campaigning was, I guess, probably the style of campaigning that I did, right? Like mine was very just talking to people on the street.
Yeah.
And the videos are still, I think they're still up on my YouTube channel where it's like I would talk to young people and ask them, what are some of the things that they think are important to them. And,
But you've got to say what's even bigger for your circumstances. You ran for the Senate, so you've got to cover all of New South Wales. But if you're running lower house in a federal election, you got 100,000 people to get in front of. How do you do that?
Well, yeah, it's basically you got to be out there talking to people. Really, that's what I don't know. I think that's still the best way. Like I think the only way that you're going to get in front of people, and it's very different when you set up like a marquee and you're at an event or something like that, and people sort of can see your face on the call flute and can see that that's what you're about. Like I think the only way that you're going to get honest feedback is when people don't have those prior judgments. And the only way to get that is basically just talking to people. Like I would literally just have my camera and be walking the street, and like I went to like the Lakemba night markets during the Ramadan Nights Festival. Yeah, and I'd take pictures of the food and things like that as well, and turn it into a bit of like I guess content. A bit of fun for me in terms of like producing content. Yeah. Because that wasn't my background, but it was something that I learnt on the fly for doing a lot of that stuff. But just like being in lines waiting with people and then just asking questions. And
look, I agree with you, and that's how incumbents get so popular. They do that work. Yeah. They do it the whole time that they're in Parliament, office, in office, and they're getting paid to do it. Yeah, they don't have full-time jobs in the background. Yeah, they're completely devoted to doing that sort of stuff. And if you talk to really good really good incumbents that really work hard for their communities, they'll tell you that if there's ever a swing against their party, they could survive just based on that extra 3 or 4% of people that they've really built relationships with. But in regards to minor parties like us and people that are, we all put up our own money to run. I didn't get a cent from One Nation. It's all my money that's going into it. So there's a cap there, and there's a cap with time as well. How do you get in front of everyone? Even if I stood on the Spit Bridge every single morning with my signs up, well, there's only a certain number of people that use the Spit Bridge every day. Yeah. And that was one of the biggest takeaways from the federal election that I found. How do you get the message out there? How do you get in front of everyone?
It's very difficult, isn't it? Because like one of my friends, shout out to my mate Charlie, he sent me this meme and he goes, I think you'll like this meme. And it's like it's a train going down a track, right? And the color of the train's red, and then it's like there's a lever. And so, normally when you think of the lever, it's going to change which direction the train goes. And it goes, pulling the lever will change the color of the trolley from red to blue, but it's just still traveling the same pathway. Yeah. And he's like, I thought you'd like this one. And I'm like, I started laughing. I was like, okay, yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah. And it's so hard to get that cut through and actually engage with people on policy. Like, so as an example, right, like I remember speaking to a young couple and I was talking about interest rates, and they were like, "Oh yeah, it's going to be a great thing when rates go up because maybe we'll be able to get into the market." And I think like when you look at it in reflection, is that that's a very simplistic worldview of how things happen. Unfortunately, like if they're in the same position as me as renters, well, our rents have gone up dramatically as well because the cost for investors have gone up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, there's a real sort of almost like you're othering, homeowners or investors because you're not in the same category as them. So it's, you go and say, oh, well, if rates go up, they're going to feel the pain. Maybe they'll sell one of their investment properties, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you can afford to buy it because you now have to pay for that money at that higher rate as well, right? So, it was really interesting to come across those sorts of attitudes. And, for me, I always have this attitude that, the rising tide lifts all boats. Like, I want everybody to be successful. And so it shouldn't matter where you are on the economic scale, is that if Australia is successful as a country, then everybody has those opportunities to be equally as successful. Now, there's two ways that you can approach that then. You can either look at it and go, okay, you can look at the people that are successful and then go, okay, I'm going to emulate what they're doing and I want to try and work out, okay, why are these people able to save more of their money or able to pay less taxes, as an example. And they might do that because, they have expenses which they can use to offset their taxable income, right? So you've got that choice to go, okay, I'm going to either emulate what they're doing and I'm also going to participate in this system. Or the alternative is like, well, I don't want to be like them, so I'm just going to, do my own thing and hope that they suffer in some specific way monetarily, so that then perhaps I can now take their position, right? And so it's that combative versus collaborative approach, and it's really interesting that politics really creates this sort of divide between people where they're thinking about it's an us versus them mentality. It's not, hey, we're all in the same boat. One of the things that I was very big on when I was doing the speaking engagements was I would explain to people, it's like, wishing that a specific party was to fail is basically cutting your nose off to spite your face. Like, okay, Australia's spoken, Albanese's our leader, right? Me asking Albanese to fail is asking our country to fail. I don't want him to fail. I want him to listen.
Yeah.
Right? I want him to make better decisions. I want the government to do what it's supposed to be doing in terms of making the right decisions for the country, right? So they're the sorts of things that I think, often get lost in the wayside when people think about politics. They get really caught up in this game where it's like, you have to have a winner, and it's either their side or our side. No, we're all actually on the same side, and the sooner that we actually realize that we're all on the same side, the sooner we can get over the petty things and actually focus on the bigger ticket problems. The bigger ticket problems like, okay, all right, what are we going to do about energy costs? Okay, if we can all agree, okay, let's say now everybody might have a different opinion in terms of climate science and whatever else, but if we say, okay, let's all still work towards reducing our emissions, okay, I think that's a fair thing to that everybody would say, okay, that's not a bad thing, right? Okay, how do we do that? Well, why don't we put nuclear on the table, right? Well, why is that why is that option just completely off the table?
Yeah.
Right? And it doesn't matter whoever's in government, but it's currently off the table. We should be exploring all of these avenues because I think what we found, as with anything, a complicated problem doesn't need a simplistic answer. There is no panacea that's going to fix this problem. You need to have a multifaceted answer, right? You need to be able to go and say, okay, if we want to solve energy, okay, well, we need to make sure that we have, if we want to go with renewables, okay, well, let's make sure we have these renewables in line to take the place of shutting down XYZ coal plant. But then what are we going to do about the displacement of jobs? Because that's another area that you need to think about. What are we going to do about recyclables and actually recycling these materials? Because that's another thing that we need to take into account, because we might solve the problem for today, but what are we doing in 10, 15 years' time when those big wind farm fan blades need to be put away and all we can do is just bury them in the earth?
Divide and conquer. It's used as a weapon, and it's political parties use it effectively.
Yeah.
And the biggest problem is that the voters are apathetic. I feel they're probably not invested in the actual issues enough to really flesh them out. And nuclear is a good example for me. I was always very, very hesitant about nuclear energy. I was like, I don't know about the waste and everything. But when I was announced as a candidate, and I'd start having meetings with some of my supporters, and there weren't very many in the beginning. They were very pro-nuclear. I'm like, okay, I don't know about nuclear. And they're like, well, you're meant to represent us, so you better get on the right tram. So I'm like, okay. And they got me in touch with someone who had worked for Sydney Water, and he had very good background with energy, and he was part of the climate realists. And he brought up, I had a few conversations with him, and he brought up the Australian Nuclear Association, and he got me to watch a couple of their videos. And I'm like, I'm going to reach out to them. So I sent an email. The secretary, a guy called Dr. John Harries, replied. He's been a nuclear physicist for about 30 years. And I said, I'm a candidate for a ringer. I'm trying to learn a little bit more about nuclear energy. Can I give you a call? He's like, yeah, of course. So I'll give him a call. And I said, look, I had a whole bunch of questions. I said, how do you deal with the nuclear waste? Because it was a big thing for me. I guess I'd grown up watching The Simpsons and seeing the three-eyed fish and the
Blinky.
all that sort of stuff. And he said, what waste? And I'm like, the nuclear waste. And he's like, you have uranium. It's in the ground. It's already radioactive. You mine it out of the ground. You enrich it and put it in a reactor. You deplete that uranium, and then you can store it on site, or potentially put it back into a geological site that's suitable. He's like, what waste are you talking about? And it was like a light bulb went up above my head. I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. And he would always make a big point about we store it on site. And I didn't understand why he was making that big point. I'm like, you're going to need a big site to store all this waste. Wasn't until later that I discovered that the waste is so small. For the whole life, Johnny, for your whole life, the amount of nuclear waste that you yourself would generate is the size of a Coke can. So that's how small it is. That's why they can store it on site, because the waste is a lot smaller than you would think. And I always make the analogy, if you told me you have a baby on the way, or say a couple of weeks before that baby's born, you and your wife go to the nuclear plant. And you say, we have a baby that's going to be born in a week or two. We want to allocate the nuclear waste for our newborn. And they take the little Coke can down. They say, here's your Coke can, we'll put it in the reactor. And you walk away. That's the energy consumption for your new child for the rest of their life. Yeah. You don't have to worry about spending trillions of dollars on renewables. And we can get into that because, as you said, yeah, they do need to be replaced all the time. No one thinks about the mining that goes into building them. Yep. The cobalt in the Congo where they're using child labor. Yep. Or the Uyghur population being used as forced labor in China to build components for these solar panels and wind farms. Yep. 80% of it comes from China because they've got such a stranglehold on the market. So you have to now, instead of being energy independent, Australia being energy independent or America being energy independent, now we're energy dependent on China. Because every 10 years we have to call up the Chinese and say, okay, we've got a whole bunch of solar panels here that we need replacing. And, our situation with China, we would like it to be a good relationship, but it could be hostile. We don't know. So we're going to put all our reliance in an energy source where we have to rely on another country for that energy source when we've got an abundance of natural resources all around us. Yeah, that's right. And not only that, they're building all these wind farms out in rural areas and solar panels out there. Well, they have to build the transmission lines to connect to them as well. Yeah. You can take a small modular nuclear reactor. If you want to get rid of coal, that's fine. But you can take one of these small modular reactors and put them on the site of a coal plant and plug it straight into the transmission lines. Obviously, there'd be a little bit of cost to upgrade the systems or whatever you have to do. Yeah. But you don't have to rewire the whole nation to do that. But no one wants to have that conversation. Yeah. They say,
it's too hard of a conversation to have.
It's too expensive. well, because we don't. And the problem with the people that are advocating nuclear, they can't answer that question of why it's too expensive because they just don't know. I'd asked Dr. Harries this. I said, well, how much is it going to cost if we went nuclear in Australia? He said, to be honest with you, we don't know because it's an emerging technology, these small modular reactors. Yep. Setting them up would be a cost, and that cost is unknown. It could be small, it could be high. But once it's established, each new reactor that we build becomes cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And the fuel is actually quite cheap. Mining the uranium and using it as a fuel source is basically nothing.
Yeah.
So once you've got it established, one, you're not paying for a very expensive fuel, and two, you don't have to rewire the whole nation to connect to it. And the other thing as well, we spoke to, and we can talk about, I've been mentioning the podcast, it's the Ex-Candidates podcast that I've been doing since the federal election. We interviewed an environmental scientist called Pamela Jones, and she's up in far north Queensland. And they're building all these wind farms and everything. And they're just bulldozing forests and rainforests through these very sensitive biodiversity corridors. So not only are you bulldozing all this land to build the wind farms, but you're bulldozing all these trees and natural habitats and everything to build the transmission lines as well.
Yeah.
Where are the Greens defending that? They're not talking about that.
Yeah, it's insanity.
It's crazy, and people not really fleshing out how much land we need for these solar farms and wind farms and
yeah, it's huge.
Yeah,
hectares and hectares.
Yeah,
yeah, it's one of those things that going back to your comment about why voters are apathetic. I think it's because there's a lack of accountability, right? When I say there's a lack of accountability, it wasn't one of Albo's promises something about $275 reduction in energy costs.
Well, you want to talk about accountability? What about Dan Andrews?
Yeah,
where's the accountability for that guy?
Yeah, so look, I made funny story. I made this parody because I was watching a lot of Hamilton. I don't know if you've seen the musical Hamilton.
No.
But it's basically talking about the American Revolution, and it's a musical, and the music's very, very good. So my wife and I was really into Hamilton when the election was on, and I used to always have Hamilton playing to G myself up, when I was going to events and feeling like I'm a revolutionary.
Yeah.
And
it's like your Rocky music.
Yeah, it's like my Rocky music, and so I made this parody, and it got flagged. So it was one of the Hamilton songs, and I sung it, and I sent it around to a few people, and it was like, it was quite funny. But anyway, let's move on from Dan Andrews, because I don't think there's any winner there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But I mean, it brings up a point that we're focusing a lot on what happened during the pandemic, but a lot of it's not resolved. And one of the
we're still paying the cost of it, because I think there wasn't like Western Australia. I might have to double check my figures, but I thought it was like $600 million on rat tests or something like that they didn't end up using, and that $600 million could have been used to build hospitals. Yeah, like if the big crisis at the time was, hey, we don't have enough hospital beds. Well, if you reinvested that $600 million into more nurses, doctors, or whatever you like, plus facilities. Now, I know facilities don't get built overnight, but we went through this process of 2 years of a pandemic, so
with nothing to show for it.
Has there been an increase in hospital beds? I'd like to know. I don't know the stats, but if someone knows, feel free to reach out and tell me. Did we manage to increase our nurse numbers? Look, possibly, now that we've opened up the borders and we're bringing more nurses in from outside.
Well, you still have nurses that can't work because they're not vaccinated.
That's right. So these are sort of the things that when we go into policy, there's everybody wants to find the silver bullet. We'd love to have this silver bullet, and vaccination was seen to be that silver bullet. But if it was such a silver bullet, why did we need all the alternative things as well, like the masks and the lockdowns and the isolation periods and the contact tracing? We spent all this money on this contact tracing app that is now decommissioned, right?
If you had spent trillions of dollars on infrastructure, you'd have something to show for it.
Well, and this is I think goes back to the core in terms of what people actually think government is supposed to be there for. So I have this, and maybe my view is simplistic, but I think government is there for infrastructure and services.
Yep.
Right. They're the two areas that the government should be heavily entrenched in, and
at least on a state level.
Yeah. Well, even at a federal level, it's more like defense and foreign policy and those sorts of things. But definitely from a state level, it should be infrastructure, services. Those are like the two critical things that I think you can't go wrong if you're continually investing in upgrading your facilities or upgrading your people, right? Because it's just like in business, right? If you're running a business and you reinvest your capital into growing your business or growing your people, that is going to yield a bigger dividend.
Yeah.
But we end up in this state where, and I don't mean to use the word state, but we end up in this position where, we've accumulated so much debt. We've no answer in terms of how we're really going to address this in any sort of timely sort of situation. that, interest is being accrued on, that we as the people, pay or have to shoulder, with our taxes and all of these sorts of things. And at the end of the day, the only way that you can address it is by either increasing taxes or reducing expenditure.
Yeah.
Right? Reducing expenditure means that we don't get as much infrastructure and we don't get as much services. Increasing taxes means that we obviously don't have as much money to enjoy life and live, and inflation's already taken a lot of that away.
Yeah.
So we went on this massive political tangent. I don't always mean to kick off, podcasts with a political tangent. Let's actually wind it all back.
Okay.
Right?
Because that's what we're here for, though.
But I might have done us a disservice. So, if people have switched off because we started talking about political stuff, I apologize. I think, I probably should have led first with, a bit more about your upbringing.
It's important, though. People should be interested in this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I feel.
Yeah.
Look at the trajectory of this country from the time of John Howard to now. Like, there's something wrong. And if people, we brought it up, the apathy of the voters, if they don't pay attention to this sort of stuff, then you get what you get.
Yeah.
You get, as you said, red or blue on the same path.
Yeah.
They don't care.
Yeah.
They know every 10 years it switches and they get back in and they swap around or whatever. So, go in the direction you want to go. But I just wanted to make that point because I think people should take more interest in politics.
Yeah. No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. But I just, I want to make sure that we give people a good understanding of, who you are and some of the things that you've done throughout life. So let's sort of wind it all back. So you mentioned, did you grow up out west in Parramatta or?
No, I grew up in Ashfield.
Ashfield, okay.
Very, very humble beginnings. My parents met in the Gold Coast.
Okay.
My dad was from up there. My mum was just visiting.
Yep.
And they tell a very romantic story about how they met at the Jet Club, which is not there anymore. It was in Coolangatta.
Okay.
And my dad was playing football for the Tweed Seagulls.
Yep.
Which eventually became the Gold Coast Seagulls. And if you go into their clubhouse, you can see his photo up on the wall where he won some premierships, and I think it was Group 18 or something. But he was a big footy player, and my mum was at this club, and she was trying to organise a lift home, and suddenly he walks in at the end of the night, and apparently that was his strategy. He'd just rock up at the end of the night and pick up whoever needed a lift home, and
it was her.
And she tells a story about how it was one of those moments that they looked at each other and they just knew, like they couldn't take their eyes off each other.
Yep.
So that's how my parents met. They lived up on the Gold Coast for quite a while. And then she got pregnant with me.
Yep.
And she felt that she needed to move back home to Sydney to be with her parents so they could support her because she didn't know, she was 23 and she didn't know what to do with the baby or anything like that. So we lived at Barwell Park at my grandparents' place for a short time, and then my grandfather was a real estate agent and he got us a small 1-bedroom flat in Ashfield.
Yep.
So eventually it was my parents and my brother and I in a 1-bedroom in Ashfield. Very, very humble beginnings. We lived there probably until I was maybe about 8 or so. And then we moved to Petersham. And then my father's still in Petersham now, and that's where I was until probably about 22.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you remember do you remember much about the 1-unit apartment? Like obviously one unit is very small.
Yes.
So,
Yes. And what it was a house. It was a big house.
Yeah.
It was a family home that my grandfather ended up buying. And then he converted into 3 separate units.
Ah, okay.
So if you can imagine a house in Ashfield split into 3.
Yeah. That's what it was.
And we were in one of them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And so it would have been like, did you end up bluing with your brother a lot or?
Well, when you grow up, you don't know any different.
Yeah.
And that's your perception.
Yeah.
So I don't remember it ever being small. My mum talks about it being small now and how hard it was for them. But I don't remember that. I always remember us having a very happy childhood. My brother and I were always playing. My brother and I are very different in a lot of ways. And he would always want to be fighting and I just want to be left alone.
Yeah.
So that's just what it was when we were growing up. But I always remember a very happy childhood.
Yeah.
It was easy back in those days.
Yeah.
No internet, no mobile phones. I look back at the 90s and just think It was so easy back then. You know, you could turn on the TV and you had good movies and good TV shows. Like I was happy just sitting in front of the TV watching Transformers and Ninja Turtles and all that sort of stuff, and Agro's Cartoon Connection. Like if you look up Agro now on YouTube, you're like, oh,
yeah, you see all the he was actually a bit of a creep. I don't know if that just went over our heads when we were kids, or
you don't know.
We didn't notice.
You don't know.
Did we just not notice, or
no? You just thought he was making some joke.
Yeah,
you didn't know what the joke was.
Yeah, that was the norm. But yeah, now when you that's a cool rabbit hole for people to go down. If you go and check out Agro's Cartoon Connection, and look at some of those. I don't know if they're outtakes or that was legitimately in the show. I don't remember him doing those things at the time, but you know, it's quite funny when you.
But it's like one of those things you watch back a movie that you hadn't seen since you were a kid, and you pick up on so much. That just goes over your head because you don't know. Yeah. But it's just perception.
Yeah. Well, there's this one like of an old Mickey Mouse cartoon, and it's like a cheese factory, and they're putting holes in the cheese. Yeah. But then it was like, wait, how's he putting holes in the cheese? So, you know, that sort of might paint a picture of it. Like, you know, wait a second here. Like, you know, you sort of just look at it, and as a kid, you wouldn't even think twice about it. But as an adult, you go, what? He's doing what to the cheese now?
Yeah. And it was crazy. Like, I remember, you know, the 90s were a cool time because you could kind of get away with anything. Yeah. And I remember watching wrestling or you know, Jerry Springer or something like that, and the idea was to offend to the greatest amount that you possibly could. Yeah. Whereas now it's the complete opposite, and it's a lot freer back in those days. Obviously, you can point to instances where people were targeted and unfairly or whatever, but I just feel like it was the old saying, "Sticks and stones can break my bones, but names will ever hurt me." Yeah. I think we need to kind of revert back to what it was. I mean, everyone always paints a rosy picture of their childhood. My dad talks about the 70s and how great it was then, and I talk about the 90s and how great it was then. But I think we can definitely learn from things of the past. But it was a good time. It was a good childhood, at least for me. Very, very humble, but it was nice.
Yeah. And so what was school like for you? You know, what kind of kid were you in school? Well, what did the teacher say about you?
I was a little bit outgoing when I was younger. But when I reached puberty, I actually went into my shell quite a lot. I was very, very shy. I had a very, very strong social anxiety.
Yep. And what do you think was the cause of that?
I don't know. I think it's just something I could never really get get control of. And I'd be like, especially group situations, one-on-one I'm okay, but if I'm in a group situation, I kind of just shut down. Yeah. And I just can't control it. It's just something that overcomes me. I just feel very uncomfortable and I don't know what to say. When I was at high school, I was known as the guy that just never spoke. Yeah. Because I was always very concerned with if someone asked me a question, I'd be analysing, don't say anything wrong. Or, you know, and you kind of learn as you go along that people don't care. People don't think about people don't overanalyze things like you do. And I remember I kind of worked out a method that if I sat at the front row but to the edge, you're out of the view of the teacher. So then they wouldn't ask you any questions. Because that was like my worst nightmare, for a teacher to ask me a question. Because then I would have to worry about answering it in a certain way. So I always had a small group of friends that I was quite close to, but I felt comfortable with. Yep. And yeah, I mean, I always say my life didn't really start until I left high school. Really? Because high school was very mundane. I didn't really do too much. Yeah. I just tried to behave myself and keep out of the limelight.
Yeah, fly under the radar.
Yeah, definitely.
So then what sort of things were you into at that age? So let's say take high school, for example. You know, if school wasn't, you weren't really that interested in school, or were you interested in school? Or
to a point, like I always wanted to do well, but I hated studying. Yep. I hate reading, even though I like writing. Yeah. People go, well, how does that work? But I'm not good like reading. So, I definitely wanted to do well at school, but I didn't try as hard as I probably should have.
And did you have any ideas what you wanted to do after school?
None. No idea.
Yeah.
No idea. And when I left high school, obviously everyone's going to university. Well, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I came to the conclusion, well, I'm not going to go to university and just study anything because what's the point of that? Yeah. So I thought I hoped that eventually I would fall into something that I would then go to university. But ultimately it didn't happen. I didn't end up going to university. So yeah, I had no idea what I was going to do. I left high school and started working for Pizza Hut.
Yep.
And that was good for me because I really liked the people there, and obviously serving customers and that sort of thing brought me out of my shell a little bit because you have to. It's your job.
Yeah.
So that helped me a lot, and I was there for about 2 years. Mainly because like it didn't pay very well, and people would say to you, "Where do you work?" And you'd be like, "Oh, well, I'm the assistant manager of Pizza Hut," and they'd be like, "Oh," but it actually trains you really well for life and for other employment as well, because if you're working in a store and you have to basically run everything. If you're the manager, and at times you're the only one, like if you're working during the day, you're doing everything. Yeah. You're dispatching orders for the drivers, you're making the pizzas, you're washing up, you're serving customers, you're taking phone calls all at once. And at times, if you're busy, it's overwhelming. So I remember, at times you'd have everything. You'd have pizzas coming out of the oven and they're starting to pile up. And if they obviously start to pile up enough, they start to burn.
Oh, wow.
And I just remember thinking, this is overwhelming. How am I going to do this? And I just remember thinking, just do what you're good at. Just do the simple stuff first. Yeah. And you'd find a way of getting out of it. Yeah. So that was obviously people look down on people that are working in fast food, but I think especially for young people, it's a very good employment because it teaches them so much. Yeah. It teaches them to interact with others. You're working in a high pressure, fast-paced environment. You have to learn how to multitask and do things a lot, differently at once. So yeah, I spent way too long there, but I think it taught me a lot. Yeah, and dealing with people. Yeah,
I think a lot of people have that where they might be shy or not quite comfortable to get out and say hello to people and do those sorts of things. But when you have to do it for work, it's almost like you have this other version of you that you can tap into to be that person while you're at work.
Plus, it's repetitive. Like when you deal with a customer, hey, how are you? You're going to say that. You're going to introduce yourself that way every single time. And what would you like? What pizza would you like, or what order would you like? So there's a little bit of repetitiveness to it that you can use. Okay, well, this is what I have to say. My biggest problem was I never knew what to say. Yeah. Like, especially when it came to women. How do you go to a club and approach a woman? What do you say to them? I never got my head around that.
Hello?
Well, yeah, it's that simple, right? You go, hello, right? But I was always I still am to a point. I'm quite awkward with people. I just have that personality where I am in my head a lot. And I think a lot of people say to me, "Oh, you're very quiet." I'm like, I feel like I've been talking the whole time. But I don't think I realize myself how much I'm in my own head.
You're just talking to yourself in your head?
Basically, probably. That's probably what's happening. That brought me out of my shell a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
So then what did you do after Pizza Hut?
I ended up at Australian Geographic, so more retail. Okay. I was there for about 10 months and then I ended up at the Commonwealth Bank. Okay. And that was another really good experience because it taught me a lot about, I guess, banking and the economy and those sorts of things. And again, it was another high stressful environment because we're always understaffed and I started off as a head teller, but then I started doing customer service and setting up personal loans and doing everything in the branch. And that was a really good experience as well. I was there for about a year. And then my friend was studying civil engineering, and while he was at uni, he got this job as a survey assistant because civil engineering is kind of closely associated with surveying. And he got a job up in Queensland. And he kept telling me about this job, and I'm like, "What is surveying?" And he was very vague about what it was. And it's an industry that's actually really hard to explain. Like I even struggle explaining it now. Yeah. But he was telling me about how he would work hard for a couple of hours and then he'd sleep in his car for 3 hours and get paid all this money. And I'm like, that sounds good to live in Queensland. And I'm like, well, if anything ever comes up, let me know. So probably about 2 or 3 months later, he called me up. He said, my boss is looking for workers. He's got this new job up on the Gold Coast. It's a desalination plant in Tugun. And he just basically needs survey assistance, which is essentially just a labourer. You just help. And I'm like, okay. And the idea was to go up there for about 9 months and just party. Just go to Surfers Paradise every night, just an easy job. And then you go partying every night. And then after the 9 months, move back to Sydney and I guess go back to the bank.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't quite work out that way. I moved up there.
Yeah.
Well, first I didn't know what surveying was. Everyone was like, well, why are you leaving the bank and going to be a surveyor? I'm like, oh, I'm going to be a surveyor. And they're like, what's that? I'm like, I don't know. I think they build roads or something. And then I moved up there. We didn't have any place to live. I'd gone up a couple of weeks beforehand to try and find a rental place.
Yeah.
And thankfully on the way up there, the real estate agent called me and said, you found a place for you. So when I got there, we had a place, but moving up there, I didn't know. So I didn't take too many things with me.
Yeah.
I'd never moved out of home before. I was 22. And yeah, it was just like, let's move to the Gold Coast and party. Well, it didn't work out that way because we were working 55 hours a week and I was just wrecked by the end of it. And but I ended up staying for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Because I just loved it.
What was it about surveying or being a surveying assistant that you liked?
Well, the first day I rocked up on site, I was very metrosexual, living in Sydney and partying in Oxford Street every weekend or whatever, and then I get on site with all these Queenslanders, and a lot of them had come from North Queensland, and they had this heavy Australian slang, and I thought they were talking another language. They would talk to me. I have no idea what these guys are saying. And every second word was the F word or the C word. Get that effing thing and move it. But, that's how they talk. And that got beaten out of me very, very quickly. Very, very quickly.
You were coming to work, hair's all done by the end of the night, collar's half down, and covered in
rubbish. And it's another very good experience for me. So I was basically told, here's the pole, the survey pole with a prism on top. Here's the bubble. All you have to do is keep that bubble level, and that's all you need to know. I'm like, I'm getting paid 10 grand more for this, and just to kind of hold a pole all day and work out in the sunshine and get a tan and live near the beach. I'm like, this is fantastic. So that was okay for about the first 6 months.
Yeah.
And because I'd always been in management roles and everything like that, after about that, I'm like, I feel like I'm just being wasted here.
Yeah.
I remember one day the boss came in and someone needed something. He just pointed over to us and said, just get the help to do it. I'm like, the help? I'm the help?
Yeah.
So I didn't like that. So a guy rocked up, another surveyor that come up from Melbourne, and I got put with him. And he said, the first day he said to me, if you keep the car clean and the batteries on charge, I'll make you the best surveyor here in 6 months. And he just threw everything at me, all his knowledge. And I'd go home exhausted, not from physicality of the day, but the mental.
Yeah.
Just learning everything about surveying. And after 6 months I was a surveyor.
Yeah.
And I've been doing that since 2007.
Wow. So what were some of the lessons that he imparted to you, in that short period? It's like 6 months doesn't sound like a long time, but obviously, if you're in there getting these intense lessons from this guy, are there any standout sort of lessons that you picked up from that? And then are there any lessons that sort of maybe apply from surveying more broadly in life?
It's funny that you say that because I can't really remember the surveying lessons too much because he was such a rocket, like he was just
nonstop.
He was real combative. He was always very nice to me. He treated me like a brother, but on site he would just blow up at anyone.
Yeah. But
I remember the best lesson I learned from him was we'd be in the car and he'd be like, I'm going to go back to the office. I'm going to say this to that person and I'm going to let them know how I feel. And he'd get really riled up, this is the sort of guy he'd walk down the street in Coolangatta and get into punch-ups with people.
Yeah.
And I remember he still got a scar above his eye there where he got hit one night.
Yeah.
Like he was just that combative sort of person. And I'd never really been around that before. And, when people say they're going to do something, they're going to say something to someone, and they never do it. And I kind of just took that. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. But he would go into the office, go straight up to the person and word for word say exactly what he was going to say. And I learnt that. I'm like, yeah, well, you have to be honest with people.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to let people know what you think. And I saw him do it and I admired that in him. So that was the best lesson that I learnt from him. Obviously, he set me up on a career path that has been very rewarding for me. But it was the life lessons that he taught me as well that were very important.
Yeah, I think that that value, like people often think about, when you think about core values, right? People might often think honesty is a great core value to have, right? But I have a problem with the word honesty simply because like when we're kids, we're sort of ingrained with this mentality. If you don't have something nice to say, you don't say it.
Yeah.
Right. So then are you still being honest, or is that, starting to border on a little bit of dishonesty if you don't say it? So for me, as I went throughout my career, one of the stages I got to was that I need to be beyond honest. So one of the things that was important to me is like my integrity is one. So obviously having a good name in terms of, do what you say what you do. But then I realized that for me as in terms of managing people, transparency was actually going to be a better asset than honesty, because honesty means that, I can be honest to a point until I have to have a hard conversation, in which case I might avoid it because it might not be something nice to say.
Yeah.
Whereas transparency is different. It's more like, okay, I need to be transparent about these things so that you have a choice then, right? You have a choice in terms of how you respond.
Yeah.
So when it comes to giving feedback, so I used to basically give all my staff almost like a mentoring session, once a month. And in that mentoring session, we don't just talk about work, we talk about life, we talk about goals, we talk about all these different things. And I challenge them to really think about, what's their core value, right? Because, why I say that is because a core value is something that if you couldn't live your life with that core value intact, life wouldn't be worth living.
Yeah.
Right. And it changes throughout your life. Like when you're young. So for me, when I was young, I would say I probably valued success more than anything else.
Yeah.
Right. And when you put it head to head, okay, success versus being honest, I'd rather be successful than the honest guy. Right. But then later on in life, it was like, okay, I don't value success as much. I'd rather be that transparent person that, because, transparency then leads to, you can say honesty is encompassed in that. You can say integrity is encompassed in that. But being able to have those hard conversations is a skill, right? Not everybody can manage those very difficult conversations where you have to say to somebody, hey, the work that you're producing is substandard, and these are the reasons why I think it is, but is there a reason why you think that might be? And how do we actually then coach to get the right outcome?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, you get those people that are overly nice. Well, I never trust them because I'm always thinking, well, what are they thinking in the background? Yeah. I'd rather you be brutally honest with me.
Yeah.
Even to the point where I might react badly, but 5 minutes later I'll have a think about it and it'll guide me in the right sort of path.
Yeah.
And I say to people sometimes, like, tell me the truth. Like I might get upset, but at least I'll be able to reevaluate everything and go on the right path. Like if you keep just saying nice things, I'm going to keep thinking I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And, you brought up, trying to be more successful than being honest. Well, I think the only thing you can die with is your honor. So if you're not honorable and you're not truthful, then what do you end with? You can't take anything with you. You can't take money with you. You can't take, a nice sports car with you. It might be nice while you're alive. But the only thing that you can take with you is your honor and how people remember you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that was an important lesson. I think I've taken that all throughout my life, and especially into politics, where sometimes you just have to say what you believe.
Yeah.
And you get these politicians that are, you can tell that, because you can say, you said this in the past, and now you're saying this now, and then you're saying this again. Like, Matt Canavan's a good example of that. He's always chopping and changing his opinions. But, I think, what do I admire in people? I think conviction. Standing up for what they're believing and saying it when it's it might not be the most popular viewpoint, but it's their viewpoint.
Yeah. Well, it's I think there's an adage, better the heart through, like a knife through the heart than a knife in the back.
Yeah.
Right. So, if you're going to say something, being able to say it to somebody's face.
Yeah.
There's value in that, and that's where that honor or that integrity sort of comes into it, is that, oftentimes in a workplace, like people might say things as a bit of a joke, but then they actually mean it.
Yeah.
Right. Why don't you just come out and say it?
Yeah. Well, what do they say? Behind every joke is a truth.
Yeah, a little bit of truth. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's a leadership quality. I've noticed it myself, because I'll just come out and say something, and people will look at you like, you can't say that.
Yeah.
Well, I just did.
Yeah.
And then they kind of you can tell that they look up to you now.
Yeah.
Because and it's the same with the situation that I had with the guy that trained me.
Mm.
I looked up to him because as soon as I'm sitting there in the car, he's saying, I'm going to say this, this, and this. He's going to be very combative. And then he went and said word for word what he said he was going to say.
Mm.
I found that admirable, and I looked up to him after that.
Yeah.
And I think I've noticed it in other people because they've said to me, I can't believe you said that. Well, it needed to be said. And I think a lot of people, especially at work, and this is something that, again, back to the pandemic, a lot of people were worried about losing their job and concerned with how their employers were going to treat them. Well, they're paying you. They're paying you because they need you. They need you possibly more than you need them. So I think a lot of people don't realize that. And sometimes you need to kind of stand up and be honest and be truthful. And sometimes it slaps you in the face, but most of the time you're better off for it.
Well, I think one of the things that changes your frame of reference in that is when you have kids. You know, so like if I go back to me before I had children, I had a very different outlook on the world. You know, once you have a child, it's sort of your frame of reference becomes a little bit different because now you're thinking about the future of this thing that you've brought into the world.
Yeah.
Right? And so, you know, for me, I was probably fairly apathetic towards political systems and politics. Like it was there, but it didn't really impact me, so to speak.
Yeah.
But then once I had children, I really started to put a lot more thought into my decisions because it's not just impacting me anymore. And it's crazy, right? Because the reality is that even if you don't have kids, your decisions don't just impact you either. Like it's impacting your people around you. You might have nieces and nephews. You might have other family, or you might have friends who have kids.
Yeah.
Right. So this is where it's like, you know, people should really be paying attention to some of these things because it's not just the decision that is right for them, but it's also right for the people around them as well. And this is where it gets into that almost like this ideological battle, right? Where it's like, you know, people would use that same argument to say, oh, well, that's the reason why you should get vaccinated, right? Now, I know it's a lot more complex than that, and there's plenty of research that underpins all that. But, you know, when it comes to things that are absolute, there's very few things in this world that are absolute, right? Everything else sort of errs in that moderation is sort of key, right? Because I think ultimately, you know, when you think about society and all different political structures around the world, whether it's China, whether it's America, whether it's Singapore or Malaysia, or you pick any sort of country, Africa, right? The commonality in terms of the goals of each community group is to have a coherent society, right? But then how do we get there? That's the big question, you know, because people would probably balk at the Chinese ideology from the Western standpoint and go, well, I'm not going to give away all my freedoms to live in a society like that.
Yeah.
But we're quite happily ready to give up a lot of those freedoms to and be able to turn around and say, well, it's for the good of everyone else, right? And we use that as sort of a bit of a line. And then, you know, depending on what it is, we pick and choose what are the things that we want to, that we find acceptable. You know, then people might say, oh, my body, my choice. That's a completely acceptable line of reasoning in justification of abortion. But then you're taking away somebody else's life.
Yeah.
Right? So is that really a justified situation? But if I want to use the same my body, my choice when it came to vaccination, is that, you know, there's a bit of hypocrisy there.
Yeah. One of the best lessons I've ever learned in life is that no one will think the same way that you do. And it doesn't matter how much you try and convince them, they're always going to think differently. And you just have to accept that. And I think that's why you do need a free and open society, because if you go down authoritarian routes, well, what's behind that? They think that they have the moral authority to tell other people what to do because they think that their way is the best way. Well, it might not be for some people. And I remember getting told in school, oh, communism is great in theory but not in practice. Well, no, it's not good in theory either. Because what happens if you want to be an entrepreneur? What happens if you want to excel in life and start a business or start some new thing that's contradictory to what everyone else thinks? And apparently there's a little bit of that in humanity, that I think it's about 25% of people will disagree with anything. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, contrarians.
That's right.
You're just always looking for the alternative viewpoint.
But there's actually a purpose for that, and it's actually served humanity quite well. Because the example that I heard was, say, for example, a tribe had to migrate every year, and they always followed the same path, and they knew that path had always been safe in the past, and that's the path that they should always take. 25% of the group and their leader says, no, well, we've had a little bit more rainfall this year. There might be more risk of a what do they call when the land
landslide?
Landslide.
Yep.
There might be more of a risk of the landslide that will wipe us all out. We need to take the harder route all the way around. And they go, no, you're crazy. Like this route's the one that we've always been using. We're going to stick to that route. Well, the main group takes that route and gets wiped out. That 25% of the crazies go the harder route and survive. Now that might be a bad analogy, but it explains that there's this part of the human, I guess, collective that you need some disagreement just to kind of, as you said, everything's about balance, right?
Yep. And
you can't be too. I guess that's the eternal battle between the conservatives and the left. You do need the left there to keep the conservatives in check, because the conservatives will just conserve what they've had and just keep going along the same path forever. You do need the left to be in there and spice things up, and maybe they spice things up a bit too much sometimes. And each side can go too far, and they need the other side to balance them out.
Yeah.
So I don't know how we got onto that, but
well, it's I think there's a bit of that in terms of in human nature, right? Like there are things that we can relate to very easily, depending on our upbringing, depending on our social status, depending on our parents. Because when we're born, we're given these different lenses to view the world, and it's through our parents' eyes that we probably filter a lot of information as we're growing up. And then I talk about this idea a lot because when we become teenagers and we grab a social circle of friends, and nobody likes to be left out, so they want to sort of share some of the same ideals as their friends, and they pick up some of those ideas and they use those lenses to then view or take their standpoint on certain things. And then it's only really when you move out of home and you're on your own that one of two things happen. You either end up spending a lot of time by yourself and you sort of realize, shit, I actually hate myself and I need to spend some time working on me, or alternatively the other option is what most people probably end up doing is they distract themselves. It's easy to go out and party.
Yeah.
Right. And go out and spend time with friends. Like I might live out on my own, but I never spend any time by myself because I've always got friends over or I'm always out partying.
Yeah.
Right. And so, when you do that, I think, for most people up until COVID happened, everybody was so busy in their own lives that they didn't really have any time to sort of contemplate, other ideas or other perspectives and that sort of thing. And then, it was once everybody had a chance to slow down, people started to realize, and even now, there's this whole sort of toing and froing in terms of working from home and this whole, work-life balance thing. That concept basically didn't exist prior to COVID, right? Like everybody was just basically, you're at the workplace. Like the city used to boom, right? And then there's been a bit of a shift in terms of, what is the ideal way to continue working. And so people were like, okay, well, we can work from home and we'll continue to run the business and blah, blah, blah. And then now we're seeing this alternative view in terms of, business, corporate management and things like that, saying, hey, we actually need people back in the office. We need collaboration. We need all of these things. And I think it was CBA or something that, had that big furor, and they can still work from home half the week. But they take offense to, only half the week? Like, you know what I mean?
I think there's a lot of pressure put on children as soon as they leave high school to know what they're going to do for the rest of their lives. And that's a path that I didn't take. As I said, I didn't go to university, but some people feel pressured to know exactly what they're going to do at 18. It wasn't until I was 22 that I fell into surveying. I just fell in. I didn't even know what it was. And I'm very fortunate that that happened. But if it hadn't happened, who knows where I would have ended up.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of pressure there for people to know what they want to do for the rest of their lives at such an early age, where they haven't really experienced life fully, or at least they haven't experienced life on their own.
Yeah.
They've been living with their parents, from birth to 18, they don't know what it's like to be out there living on their own, or what they want to be, or who, what they want to experience.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of pressure. And as you said, COVID kind of probably did open people's eyes to what the other possibilities are. I guess the good thing about what the industry that I work in, you're always working on a different project. And it completely changes your whole life, because it might be somewhere far away.
Yep.
You have to travel an hour to work every morning, or it could be close to home. Well, that makes a huge difference to your life.
Yeah.
For me, I work night shift, but sometimes you work day shift. That makes a huge difference in your life. And even the projects are different. Some projects are just horrible. Other projects are really, really good. Some pay more, some pay less. So that no matter where you are, whether it's good or bad, it's not forever. And you're always jumping around. You have to be very versatile and flexible. And my wife she just can't get her head around it. She's like, how do you plan for anything? Because how do you know where you're going to be in 3 months sometimes?
Yeah.
And you just don't. But I often think about people that have been in the same job for 30 years, going to the same workplace every day, getting on the same train, or driving out to the same place, or, for every day for 30 years, and they're just locked into that one path, and they can't really see any. They're comfortable. I suppose you have to be in that situation. You have to be comfortable to be in that situation, but you're never really challenged. I think that's a good thing about me, is you always put in a different situation. There's a new challenge. Often, when you start a new project, you're just told an address and a time to rock up. You don't know anything else. You don't know what you're walking into.
Yeah.
So, it's a lot of flexibility that comes along with that. But you think about people that they finish high school, they didn't know what they wanted to do. They just do a uni course because they feel that that's what they're meant to do.
Yeah.
And then they get a job that they do for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And how do they really know what they wanted to do or who they wanted to be?
And it's funny, like that sometimes actually leads to depression in a lot of people, where they feel like, oh, I've got no purpose.
Yeah.
I don't know what I want to do. But sometimes that's actually precisely what you need. You need to have this time to try different things and experiment and try and work out, how do you fit into all this? Like if I sort of think back in terms of my own career about all these different things that I've done, it's like, how do all these things fit together? Well, there is no actual pathway that, accumulates all of this sort of stuff that I've done.
Yeah.
And that's part of the journey. And so, you can get yourself into a depressive state by thinking that, oh, it's going to be like this forever. But it never actually lasts forever.
Things always work out.
Yeah. Like, so there's a saying, what you resist persists. I don't want to be like that. But then you spend more time being like that because you're trying to resist it. Whereas you just need to, I think sometimes it's just about acknowledging, okay, like, and this applies to how we think about, complex topics as well. Like how I might think about a specific topic today doesn't mean that remains the way that I think about it in perpetuity. Right? We have this, that's the beautiful thing about information. As more information comes to light, we can revise our thinking and revise our thought process on it. To sort of switch gears a bit, like AI is one of those things that I've gone through so many different, perspectives on, right? Because, in the initial stages, I was actually, I was very negative on it, thinking, okay, this is something that's going to revolutionize a lot of workplaces, and, there's going to be a lot of industries that are going to lose workers as a result. And what are these people going to do?
Yeah.
Right. And then it's like, that leads into an argument, for why people think, we should have universal basic income, so that you can go and pursue whatever you like creatively. And what if you don't want to pursue anything? What if you just want to play video games?
What if you're not creative?
Yeah. Right. So it suits certain people and doesn't suit other people. And so, you can go down this rabbit hole where you just start to think, okay, we're all fucked. Like I went down that rabbit hole for a bit.
Well, I think ultimately it's never as bad as you think it's going to be, and it's never as good as you think it's going to be.
That's right.
You land in the middle somewhere.
Yeah. But this is the thing. You need those forces pulling either side, so that it's like, if you think about like a train that's being pulled by two strings, right? Yeah. One on the right, one on the left. And sometimes it veers a little bit more to the right, sometimes it veers more a little bit to the left. But at the end of the day, it's still going straight.
So much about life is balance.
Yeah.
And we brought it up before, but if you can find a balance, obviously something that you really enjoy can become excessive.
Yep.
And it can go either way. But if you can find that balance in life, I think that's ultimately what everyone should be striving for.
out of curiosity, what are you optimistic about and what are you pessimistic about?
I guess they're the same thing. I mean, it comes down to my daughter, really. I'm optimistic about watching her grow up, and she's always, she's, you see her take her first steps, and you hear her say her first words, and I can see how smart she is and how switched on she is. So I'm optimistic about seeing her grow up, but at the same time, I'm pessimistic about the world she's going to grow up in. So it's a double whammy. It's a catch-22. So, as you said, like your whole perspective of life changes when you become a parent. And I think a lot of that's biological as well. I know when my wife found out she was pregnant, this little biological thing happened in my head where I suddenly became very protective of her. And we'd be crossing the road and I'd see a car coming. I'm like, watch out.
Yeah.
Whereas before I'd be like, oh, get run over. I don't care. Like, no, not really, but like, you know what I mean? Like it's like a biological thing that just kind of clicks into your head.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of people say to me, oh, I'm not ready to have kids yet. Well, when are you going to be ready? I think the whole pregnancy, that 9-month period, is what gets you ready. Because when I found out that my wife was pregnant, was I ready? No. Was I ready 2 or 3 months in? No. It wasn't until the very end that you start to kind of click into gear a bit. And even when my daughter was born, was I ready? No.
Yeah.
Not at all. Especially,
but it's happening.
Especially with everything happening in the world at that time with my job and the pandemic and everything. It was such a crazy time. But you're never ready. It's a journey. And I think you need to treat life a lot like that. I think a lot of people just want a destination or what decision am I going to make? And my whole life is based on that decision. Yeah. Well, not necessarily. Like me running for politics, running in Moringa, I knew I wasn't going to win. I looked at the results from the previous election. One Nation hadn't run, but UAP had run and got 500 votes or something like that. And I was thinking, well, I might get the same. Yeah. I might be putting all this effort into it, my own money, and end up with 500 votes. But it's a journey. Where could this lead to? You can't think, I want to run and win. Well, I might lose. I might come last, but I might think about all the people that I meet along the way. Yeah. The amount of friends that I made in this process. Yeah. Like my wife and I ended up getting married. We couldn't get married during the pandemic, but we ended up getting married in March of 2021. Yeah. So right during the campaign. Yeah. And then it was recent. Sorry, no, it was March 2022. Sorry, I got that wrong. March 2022, we got married. So March 2023, we had our year anniversary. And I looked around and I was like, all these people that I'm really good friends with now, people like Adam Zara and a lot of UAP people and One Nation people, and I didn't invite them to my wedding because I didn't know them. Yeah. But they're like my best friends now in a very close circle. So that's part of the journey. Yeah. I don't think you should view life as I have to attain this goal and that goal. What's that saying? If you shoot for the moon, you might not get there, but you might land halfway in between or something like that. So I think that's if you can just remove that from your mind and just say, that's the journey that you learn from the journey. It's not so much the destination. Yeah. And being a parent is a big journey. Yeah. Because you learn so much about yourself, and I think a lot of it is just innate biological stuff that kicks in, and that's kind of what drives me now. Is I want my daughter to grow up in the same country that I grew up or better, and I'm petrified that she might grow up in this world where we have, an authoritarian government, or people talking about smart cities and social credit systems and one world currencies and all these things that seem very scary. And as I said before, it's never as bad as what you think. It's never as good as what you think. Yeah. But you just don't know.
Well, what informs your worldview? Like, are you religious at all? Like, spiritually wise?
No, I'm not. I'm agnostic. But I do take an interest in religion. I find it very interesting, especially where we got our moral compass from. So I do take a lot of interest in religion. I actually did a podcast with Colin Grigg, who was our Senate candidate. He's a pastor. And we talked about a lot of this stuff because he looks me dead straight in the eye and says, I know that God exists.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, well, I don't. Like, I've never had that experience. I just haven't opened myself up to that at this point. But I think I've always been very interested in politics. Even when I was a little kid, I'd sit there, watching the news, getting ready for school.
Yeah.
John Howard was a big influence of mine, and Peter Costello. And I've always loved politics. I'll go down to Canberra and go to Old Parliament House just for fun.
Yeah.
And just look around. And I love Paul Keating, and I love Paul Keating is one of those characters. I don't agree with what he says, but I just admire him for his conviction. And he's just a fascinating leader. And you kind of want to, just his quick wit. He was so funny, and he did so much good for this country. You can never, even John Howard pats him on the back for some of the things he did as treasurer.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of my worldview is based around just politics, being interested in it, following Australian politics and American politics as well. I was a big fan of Ron Paul. And a lot of Ron Paul's message was like, we just don't, we don't need as big government. Just let people live how they want to live. Small government is the key. Get out of the wars. America shouldn't be the police force of the world.
Yeah.
Just stay in America. No one's ever going to invade us. There's a gun behind every blade of grass.
Yeah.
We're fine. We're safe. We're okay. I'm spiritual in the sense of, I guess, the universe and certain.
What does that mean though? The universe.
Well, I don't know what that means. I've done a lot into looking into numerology.
Yep.
And that's fascinating. It's scary accurate once you start working out people's numbers, because everyone has a certain life path, and it all comes down to vibration. I think this is how most people kind of get along. You know how you walk into a room and you just meet someone for the first time and you guys just click. You get on very well with that person. Where there's other people you just kind of, it's oil and water. You just don't really work well together. And a lot of the big reasons why I went down that path was I was having trouble in personal relationships. I was single for a long time, and there was this on again, off again relationship that I was in that was causing a lot of drama at the time. So I kind of explored into the numerology path, and I also did a past life regression as well, which was fascinating. So in that sense, I'm a little bit spiritual, where I kind of look in depth, not so much religion as in God and all those sorts of things. It's more just energy and vibrations, and I haven't. I've heard on you speak about a psychedelic experience that you'd had in the previous podcast that I listened to. I just picked a random one and that came up. I haven't gone that far yet, but I have had people that have gone down that path. Yeah. And I think that could possibly be something that I would need to do someday.
It's something that I don't wish it upon anyone, right? Like, it's actually, like, people might think, Johnny talks about this experience, and it's like, it has changed my worldview a lot.
Yeah.
But I don't wish that experience upon anyone. Like, it was when I came out of the experience, it was like, I don't need to do that again. It was like one of those sorts
I got what I needed. Yeah. I'm out of here.
Yeah. But like, I'm sure there are people that, probably would like to go back and continue. Like, I wouldn't say never, but it was just one of those experiences where when I came out of it, I had questions when I went in. I didn't. So I always say, if you're going to do it, don't go as a tourist. Don't go just to, get thinking that you're just going to get high or have an experience. Like, actually go in and have some deep questions that you want to have answered.
Yeah.
Right. And see what gets uncovered to you. And one of the things that I found interesting about it was that when I sort of correlate my experience with some of my other friends who also tried it, we all tried it separately. Right. And then, we sort of shared notes afterwards. And it was quite interesting that two of us had a fairly similar experience, and one of the other guys didn't. And so that was interesting. But then, when you read, if you were to read stories from other people, like, there are actually a lot of similar experiences to what I've had. and my other friend had. And so, you know, when you, and I think there's some study going on in relation to DMT, where they're putting like, so it's another kind of psychedelic that people are now taking intravenously to try and like stay in that DMT realm for like hours and be able to explore it and do all this.
Don't they
sort of
stop
stuff.
their hearts and?
I don't know about that, but like it's just one of those things. Like, you know, people often talk about, you know, DMT being this experience where it's like, you know, a few puffs and you're away for 15 minutes in this other realm. But there's it seems to be a lot of commonality in terms of the images that people see.
Yeah.
And so I think that was the same thing for myself and other people on mescaline. So mescaline's from a cactus. Yep. And
well, it's funny. It's similar with the past life regressions, and I got involved in that from a woman called Dolores Cannon. She's passed away now, but she was in America, and she developed her own technique of past life regressions. And what she was finding was when she would get people to go into these past lives, the message that she was getting back was very similar. It was like a common thread that she kept getting throughout all the experiences. And she's written a whole bunch of books and everything about it.
Yeah.
So I definitely think there's another realm out there that we can't tap into, and I think that's what a lot of people are searching for. I was actually speaking to, I'm not going to mention his name, but he was telling me on the weekend about how he's joined the Masons. Well, he's been part of the Masons for a long time, but it's the same thing. He's searching for something. He's trying to search for some sort of information or wisdom or purpose or whatever it might be. But I think certain people like you and I or other people are longing for something. They can sense that there's something there that we just can't tap into yet.
I actually think that's innate in humanity, right? And the only difference is that the ones that say that they're not looking for anything from that perspective, they've just invested into something else. So whether it's, you know, CrossFit or martial arts or yoga, like they just instead of using that, like, you know, going to explore spirituality, so to speak, they're doing it through other means, you know, and we have this innate desire to try and, so if I use the word church more broadly, like the definition of a church is two or more people. So if we don't think about it from the religious sense of going to a church that's got a cross on it, etc., you can find church in basically going to the gym with some friends.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that definitely from, I guess, the interactions that I've had with people, there's definitely this innate sense in human beings to want to try and find something. And even if we're not searching for it spiritually, we'll find it in other things, and we'll make that the thing that we focus on. One of the things that I found interesting, I want to ask this about the past life regression thing, but you know, when I did this mescaline experience, and sorry for people that have heard me talk about this a million times, but you know, when you go through this process of dying over and over and over, there's only two ways that I sort of view that you can sort of come out of that. You know, you can either view that life is futile, right? Because at the end of the day, you're just going to die anyway. And when you're dead, like, so what? You know, you lived a life, so what? You know, like you think about the people that most people remember in history, they're never really any good names. You know, and most of the people we remember are the bad ones. Yeah. Right. And then, so that's one way that you can sort of come out from that experience. But I went the other way in the sense that, you know, part of the beauty of why we get to experience life is because, you know, before we were born, we were dead anyway, right? So if you think about that, there's no positive or negative attached to that. Yeah. So if the idea is that when we're dead, it'll be the same as before we were born, then there is no negative or positive emotion attached to that. But the beauty of what believing that there is a God or a creator that has built all this is that allows you to experience that, hey, somebody's built this for us to experience life. Because the reality is that before we were born, there was nothingness. We weren't happy, we weren't sad, we weren't anything. When we die, we won't be anything, right? But the fact that we could experience a life, that we get to live through these highs and lows and share in these experiences and share them with someone else and share them with other friends and family and all these sorts of things, there's something beautiful in that. And that, you know, in this life we get given this gift of free will. Yeah. That we can choose how we choose to live this life. Yeah. Right? That's something that, you know, when I think about it, like there's only like a parent would sort of understand the idea of unconditional love. Like, you know, when you look at your daughter, you go, I'm going to love you no matter what, you know.
Yeah.
When in 30 years' time, let's say she does something horrible, you're still going to love her.
Yeah.
Right? But there's a separate thing in terms of like if she does the wrong thing and she needs to, you know, atone for a crime that she's done. There's a difference between justice and there's a difference between love, right? And it's quite interesting because this is one of the concepts that I think a lot of people struggle with, and I'm still, you know, grappling with that, in the sense that, you know, a lot of people have when they think about like Christianity as an example, the idea of a heaven and a hell seems very judgmental, right? And it's like, oh, but if you love us, then, you know, why is there a heaven and a hell? Well, there's a difference between, you know, love and justice.
Yeah.
Right? You're loved in the sense that you get to live and experience this life. How fantastic is that?
Yeah.
But you make choices, right? And at the end of the day, you have to take the consequences of your actions as well. And it's not to say that that's good or bad. It's consequence and action. You know, it's something that I think a lot of cultures actually talk about this idea where, you know, and I actually talk about this a bit, where when we're young, we're sort of conditioned, and you'll see this in your own parenting, that, you know, we try and encourage our children to understand what's good and bad. You know, don't eat food off the floor, that's bad, right? And we're conditioning our children straight away with this idea that things are good and bad, rather than action and consequence. Okay, you eat this food off the floor, you might get sick.
Yeah.
Right? It's not good or bad. When you're sick, you're going to think that's bad, right? But we take this into adulthood with the same idea that everything is either good or bad. Right? And that's this idea of like heaven and hell. Everything is either good or bad, right? And so it's like, you know, you lose your job. Oh, that's bad, right? Oh, I got a pay rise. Oh, that's good, right? But thinking about things in terms of good and bad is you're just focusing on the outcomes. It's already happened. The inputs that you've already put in to get that outcome have already happened. So you can't actually do anything by thinking about things in good or bad. You can't actually do anything in effect to influence the outcome. But if you start to think about things in terms of action and consequence, right, then you can actually do something about what the outcome might be, right? So if I turn up to work on time, okay, that's good. If I then, you know, put my effort into learning as much as I can and show some initiative, I might get promoted, right? So my actions have delivered a positive consequence, right? If I rock up to work late, tell the boss to go F himself, well, I'm probably going to get a bad consequence. Right? A negative consequence. But it's all action and consequence. You are in control of your action. Therefore, you are in control of the consequence.
Yeah.
But if you're just always thinking in terms of the things that have happened are either good or bad, then in effect, you've taken away that choice that you have every day, whether you turn up or you don't, or whether you make the most of every day or you don't.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's, I think that comes from a book called The Four Agreements that comes from like Toltec wisdom or something like that. But there was a lot of crossover in terms of, I guess, how I've sort of that's informed my sort of worldview in terms of that. But how does this past life regression thing work? What is it? Like, explain more, because I'm very curious.
Well, I mean, you raised a lot of issues there. I think firstly, I remember being at school and the teacher was saying, well, what's the meaning of life?
Yeah.
And a couple of people put up some ideas, but he eventually said the meaning of life is death.
Yeah.
You will one day die. And everything that you do in your life is aimed, even though you don't realize, I need to achieve these things before I die. And I think you were talking about making decisions between good and evil. I think that's the strength in humanity, that we are capable of doing good or evil, and that there are, you know, the results from that. But ultimately, you should always try and be good. But there might be times where you need to kind of go into the evil side a little bit, maybe.
Yeah.
You know, you might say, well, should someone have killed Hitler when he was rising up and assassinated him? That is an evil act, but it may have prevented a lot of suffering and death. That's a hypothetical. But that's the power of humanity, that we have that ability. And it's I guess one of those this leads into the past life regressions, because one of the things that Dolores Cannon would always say is Earth is a school, and we're all just souls that come and have a human experience here on Earth. And she would even talk about souls having experiences as other things as well. When she would have past life regressions with people would have a past life regression being a rock. Like ridiculous things like that. Or maybe in the past I was an eagle, or I was a cow, or whatever. And the whole point was that we were just consciousness here having a human experience, and there was and we might be here due to karma from a past life. So say, for example, in a past life you were abusive towards your wife, or in this life now you're the wife and your partner's a man, and you're gonna discover the difference there, the difference between masculinity and femininity, for example. In my past life, my father now was my brother, and my brother in this life was my son. So it was very, and there's, you know, it's kind of crazy like that. But
how do you decipher that though?
So what happens is they hypnotize you.
Okay.
They put you under. I can't remember being put under, but I know I was conscious during it.
Yeah.
And it was one of those experiences. Like, I'm pretty creative.
Yeah.
Like I've written like stories and stuff like that in the past, so I know I can be creative and come up with different things. But usually it takes time.
Yeah.
And you get writer's block at certain points.
Yeah.
Someone doesn't ask you a question, you just go bang, bang, bang. Like when you're recounting something, you can do that. So that was happening. The woman guiding me through it would ask me a question and bang, I would just answer it. And I would go into quite a lot of detail. She starts off by saying, go to your happy place, and what does it look like, and what do you see, and look down, what are you wearing? And I'd just be able to answer these questions straight away. And I don't want to go too much into the past life regression because it was a bit crazy, but basically I was on another planet, and there was a war happening, and there was a group of 13 figures that were not from that world, kind of orchestrating some sort of war or something like that. And there was a lot of, I felt like that I was, I could play a role, but my partner at the time needed to be involved, and she just wouldn't be involved, and blah, 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 blah. So after I do the past life regression, the woman said, look, your mind's going to try and rationalize this afterwards. And, you know, as weeks go by, you're going to start going, oh, well, I just made it up and it's all rubbish. And that's just how the mind deals with it, because there's no way you can comprehend having a past life where you lived on another planet, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, years go by, blah, blah, blah. And I must have been like Christmas holidays or something like that. And I had time off work and I had extra time, which I don't normally have. And I'm like, oh, I'll just dust off the old Nintendo 64. And I put in Rogue Squadron, which I love playing, right? And it was really weird because I didn't have to look up the controls at all. I hadn't played it in like 15, 20 years or whatever it had been. And the controls just came back to me straight away.
Yeah.
And I'm playing, going through the levels, and I suddenly get to this level, and it's exactly the same scene out of my past life regression. And the spaceship that I'm flying is like, I was apparently some pilot in my past life.
Yeah.
It looked very, very similar to
what you're playing in Rogue Squadron.
And I'm like, did my brain just somehow pick this out of my past?
Yeah.
And turn it into some regression?
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, whether it's real or not, I have no idea based on that. But the whole process is more just trying to discover who you are and discover what your purpose is. But I think the decisions that you want to make in life, who you want to be. Do you want to be a good person? Do you want to be a leader? Do you want to be someone that can inspire people? And you got to look at your life in an overall picture. People kind of living week to week and month to month and just focusing on the here and now. Well, how is what you're doing now, how will that be viewed when someday you look back throughout your life? Yeah. You know, if you're in a dead-end job and you're not enjoying it, if you get to the end of your life and look back on that, is this where you want to be? Is this what you want to be doing? And I only went down that path because at the time I was really struggling with relationships and things that were happening in my life, and I wanted an answer for what was happening because none of it seemed to make sense. Yeah. So I was searching for an answer. So this is why I did tarot card reading and anything I possibly could to try and find an answer. But at the end of the day, you have to go through that journey, and you don't learn that answer until you actually go through the journey. But we want the answers now. Yeah. So, I mean, that was a big. Look, I don't have all the answers of what worked and what didn't, apart from just to say sometimes you just have to go through it and you have to be the best person that you can be. and you have to make the decisions based on the information that's available at the time.
Yeah. So from that perspective, do you feel like that experience helped you, or was just one of those things that you just had to do and then try all these different things?
It helped me at the time in the sense that it got me to the next step.
Yep.
I could kind of like rationalize things in my mind to a point where I was like, okay, well, it's time to move on from this, or so the situation that was happening for me, I was in this on again, off again relationship, and I had this voice in my head that kept telling me that she's the one, you just have to keep trying, and eventually it will work out. Well, I don't know where that came from, but it was rubbish. Yeah, okay. Right? Because I look back now, I'm like, why was I even interested? Like,
which head was it?
Yeah. Well, not even that. Like, I look back now and I'm just like, what was I doing? Thinking? But you just kind of get caught into a little, I guess, a loop where I think a lot of it was me just wanting to win as well. You don't want that rejection. So I need to win this person over. Yeah. Even though they're bad for you. So I went down all the different paths of trying to work out what was going on, and that was part of it. The past life regression was part of it. She was part of my past life, but it was like a similar situation where I just couldn't get her on side. And I'd gone to the Mind Body Spirit Festival and spoken to tarot card readers there, and one said that she's the antagonist in your soul circle, and all that stuff. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it was enough for me at the time to just get to the next step where like I need to leave all this behind. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, when you were growing up as a kid, like were you faced with rejection? Is there something there that made you?
No, I think it was probably the opposite. My mother was very complimentary, and she's always like, I love you, and always giving us hugs and telling us how great we were and all that sort of thing. And when you step out into the real world, you don't get that from other people. Yeah. So you're like, okay, well, I'm doing something wrong. Yeah. My wife was always like, I kind of need someone to really heap a whole bunch of praise on me before I believe them. If someone says, oh, Steven, I really enjoyed what you did there, or I'll be like, oh, they're just being nice. Yeah. They're just saying that because they feel like they're meant to say it. I don't actually believe them until they just heap it on me all the time. Yeah. And I think that's my biggest problem is when I meet someone and they might just like, say, for example, we do this podcast, at the end of it, you shake my hand and say, that was really good, Steven. Thanks for that. See you later. I'll go, was it? Yeah. What does Johnny really think about it? And if I don't hear from you again, I'll be like, oh, maybe it wasn't that good. It's like, that's just the crazy mind. Yeah. But I think that's how I mean, I don't know for sure why I am the way that I am, but I do see that a little bit, that my mother was really big on just kind of pumping us up and telling us how great we were and how much we were going to achieve in life. Yeah.
And that gave you like a false sense of security.
It did. Yeah. And a big part of, I guess, when I left school, you just felt that things were just going to happen for you. Yeah. That, the life would just present itself. And we never really got taught about hard work. I later looked back and looked at my father, who'd always worked hard. He was working 6 or 7 days a week and just working constantly. It wasn't until then when I looked back and analyzed that for myself that I was like, that's hard work. But what I was hearing was that you're very intelligent, you always excelled at this and that and blah blah blah, and you just assume that things would happen for you in life and that you would, doors would open for you, but it doesn't work like that. You need to do the hard work first.
Isn't that funny? For a parent, like they might be thinking they're doing a positive thing for their kid, trying to inflate their self-esteem. Yeah. Right. But it's one of those things that, the only way that you can derive a true sense of a happy self-esteem is through having competence, because competence is always going to be that crutch that when your confidence is lacking, if you know that, but I know my material or I know what I'm doing, that's going to give you confidence, right? And like there's a parallel that just came to me, and it's like from the automotive world, when it comes to selling cars, right? A lot of the times when new people enter the industry and maybe they're not so good at talking to people or anything like that, if there's one thing that I can stress to them is just know your product, right? If you know your product inside and out and you just invested all your time in doing that, you'll build rapport with people just through people actually recognizing that, hey, you know your stuff. Yeah. Right. And having that as the crutch to then when things don't maybe not be going the right way because perhaps the person's very standoffish or whatever, or you're being taken to an unfamiliar place by a question that you've never heard, being asked before. Having that product knowledge as your crutch gives you that confidence to be able to say, okay, these are the things that I know, and what you just asked me, I actually don't know, but because I'm new, let me go and find the answer, and then you can actually establish a really good relationship as a result of that. But if you just it's almost like when the confidence is unfounded, it's almost arrogance, right? But then when confidence is underlaid by competence, that can be true confidence.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And so, me just sort of like taking a third party assessment, from the brief 2 minutes that you explained, it was sort of thinking about that, your mum's trying to make you feel like, give you this false sense of confidence. But then you've had to rationalize that, hey, there's only one way to get real confidence, and it's actually put in the work.
Yeah.
Right. I think the same way, like I'm very much like you in the sense that I'm very hypercritical of the things that I do. I look at the whether it's the podcast or anything, martial arts or even work-wise, like I can reflect on my career and go, okay, I'm a much better operator than I was all these years ago for X, Y, and Z reasons. And this is part of the beautiful thing about going through life's journey is that, you have that time to reflect and then actually make those improvements if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah.
For some people, they don't want to spend that time to have that hard look in the mirror and then go, okay, how could I have done this better, right? And it's not to go even to the point where I want to go back and say, I would change X, Y, and Z. No, it's actually, I would make exactly the same mistakes. I just make them faster so I can move to the next part. Yeah. Right. Like even now, I'm sure I'm making plenty of mistakes, but I want to get through this period, and I actually just want to enjoy it for what it is. Yeah. Because I know that the state that I'm in today won't be the same state in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time. My family situation is going to change very quickly, as the kids grow up. And then likewise, this will be episode 100 of the podcast, right?
Congratulations.
So, episode 100 of the podcast in 5-10 years time, like what is that going to look like?
Yeah.
It might be 1,000, it might be 2,000. Who knows how many episodes I would have done by then.
Yep.
And my thinking on different topics will have changed because every time I get a chance to sit down with somebody, I get to ask about all these different, perspectives and, consider different ideas that perhaps I didn't consider before.
And you project as well. When someone opens up to you about themselves, you start to think about your own life.
Yeah.
And I suppose the flip side of what you were saying about my mother is that it did put a lot of pressure on me to succeed. Yeah. So you got someone there telling you that and it came from my grandparents as well, that you're going to be this person with a lot of success, and it just doesn't happen. You're working at Pizza Hut and everyone's going, what are you doing with your life? It puts a lot of pressure on you. So I think, especially when you get into your late 20s, you get to about age 28, you haven't really done that much in your life, and based at least from the pressure that was put upon you. So now where I'm at now is I kind of feel like it's the opposite. I feel like I'm so driven to do things because I need to catch up, and there's so much I have to achieve, and I feel like I don't have as long to do it. So that's another. It's funny how a negative can somehow lead into a positive and then lead into a negative. And as we go back to what we were saying before, it's all about balance. And then it's just funny how things in life work out that way. Yeah. It's just, I think you do need to take a step back and take that broader view of things. Yeah. But, you mentioned your martial arts. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of discipline that comes along with that. Yeah. But there's achievement in discipline as well. I did bodybuilding, very similar. You have to be very, very disciplined. You have to stick to your diet. You have to stick to your training. You basically have to cut out your social life. But you have this goal in mind, and it's kind of like running for an election. You have a 16-week period where you know that there's going to be that end result the day that you step up on stage, either competing in bodybuilding. Same for you having a fight. I'm sure you have a prep period for your fights. Yep. And you say, well, this is the date. Everything leads towards that. The thing that I struggled with bodybuilding and running for elections is once you get to that date, what do you do then?
And then what?
Then what? Yeah. And you really struggle with that because you're kind of lost for a while. Yeah. You're like, what do I do now? And it kind of leads you into, like, I remember my first bodybuilding comp that I did. Yep. And then when it was all finished and it was all said and done, it's like, what do I do now? And it kind of like pushed me into doing things that I didn't really need to do. But it's like I had to do something. I had to fill that void. But I think life isn't like to really make yourself happy in life, you need achievement. You need to be achieving something. And as I said, discipline is a form of achievement. And that's what will really make you happy. It's not just buying a new car or buying a house is an achievement. And I guess buying a good car is an achievement in a way, but it's not going to bring you fulfillment. Whereas if you can look back in your life and say, well, I've achieved this, this, and this, and I've done things that a lot of other people haven't done, then there's a certain degree of fulfillment of that. And I think the ultimate fulfillment is having a child and watching them grow and seeing them become a successful human.
Well, they unlock new experiences.
Right? Yeah, that's right.
So becoming a parent is a whole new experience in its own right. And I'm sure, being a grandparent's probably also an experience, right?
Yeah.
A lot of grandparents often, overcompensate for what they lacked, I guess, with their own children.
Yep.
Because they have this, I guess, regret of whether they didn't have time or whatever the case may be. But, everybody's situation is different. I look back at my parents and I always say, I'm so fortunate that, my parents obviously chose to come to this country, first of all. And second of all, they were so focused on trying to give us a better life that they worked all the time. So we probably didn't spend as much time, as a family as what I spend with my kids. But it was a very different situation. They're trying to establish themselves in a new country at a time when it probably wasn't as easy.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas now it's like, it's quite easy to get anywhere in the world, really, apart from COVID times. But, prior to that and even today, you can probably get around the world fairly easily. If you want, wherever you wanted to set up, it'd be quite easy as well. The internet obviously allows for the access of transfer of information to chase different things, or whether you're working, or via computers or whatever the case may be. But, as they say, like that Albert Einstein quote of, we stand on the shoulders of giants. Like my parents were those, I'm standing on their shoulders, and the things that I can do in life are only because my parents had done those certain things before me.
Yep.
Right. I think that's a beautiful way for us to wrap this one up. If people want to find you, how do they find you?
Well, the podcast that we're doing is called The Ex-Candidates. I do it with Adam Zara, who's another One Nation candidate. We had you as a former guest just recently. We've interviewed Professor Ian Plimer, Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Peter Reid, Mark Latham, a whole bunch of really notable people. It's a really good way to networking and building my knowledge as well. So just go on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Rumble and Spotify, anywhere. Just look up The Ex-Candidates. Pretty unique name, so I'm sure you'll be able to find it. And
that's
then
XEX, not SEX.
EX candidates. Don't ask me about the name. Adam Zara came up with the name, so I don't know why he chose that name. Something about Point Break, and they had the ex-presidents.
Okay.
I never watched the movie, so I don't know what he was on about. But that's the name that we're lumped with now, and we're just running with it. But otherwise, I'm on Twitter, Real Steven Tripp.
Okay.
That's probably the best way to follow me.
All right, cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Johnny.
All right.
Happy to be your 100th guest.
Hey, there we go. All right.